Hello. Today I'm going to do one of my favorite things, which is voice my thoughts on the Brent Week's Lightbringer series, which has become one of my all-time favorite series. I finished it recently and man, that was a good ride. So this video is going to be kind of a two-parter. In the first part, I'm going to rank the characters from the Lightbringer series. I love Brent Week's character work. That was probably my favorite aspect of the book. And his general writing style is probably one of my favorites because I love the humor mixed with the bittersweet, right up my alley. And I love how he kind of rationalizes everyone's emotions and we get to see everyone's particular thought processes and the reasons why they are the way they are, the decisions they make, their personalities, how they feel about themselves and the people around them. It was really fun to read. I feel like Brent Weeks really must be a people person because he seems to just understand how people work. Anyway, I love ranking characters because characters are the reason I read, breathe, live day to day. Like, you can mess up a lot in your novel, you can do a lot of fucked up shit in a novel, but if your characters are good, I don't care. You can do anything. Forget all semblance of plot. Forget settings. It's characters. Okay, anyway, even though I did just say all that, the second half of this video will be me voicing my opinion on the last book, The Burning White, and my thoughts on how the series ended, which I know is a hot topic. That being said, there's going to be a lot of spoilers. This whole video is going to be spoiling all 5 books. And there will not be a spoiler-free section because I'm incapable of containing myself. So yeah, spoilers. I think this is also going to be a long video, so I recommend you watch it after you've read the books, or if you never plan on reading them and you just want to know what's going on. Or even if you don't mind being spoiled, because a lot of the time I don't mind being spoiled. Honestly, sometimes for the sake of my health, we'll look up spoilers just so I feel calm about what's going on. Anyway, here we go. So to run you through the tiers that we have, the first tier is called Tier, and we'll get to that later. The second tier is called Bringers of Light. That tier is characters who are crucial to the story. They're basically just essential, like it couldn't be Lightbringer without them. I should mention that once again, all tier rankings are based on vibe checks, so it just depends if a character is to my personal taste. Not necessarily the actions they play in the plot or whether they're good and bad, it's just if I personally enjoyed reading them. The next tier we have is the Bad Bitches Club, and that's in every tier ranking list I make. Like, the Bad Bitches Club is, you're not the main character, but you make up the club, you make up the ambiance, the atmosphere, if you will, for the rest of the characters, and it's not to be scoffed at. The Bad Bitches Club, it's all in the name. Like, maybe they aren't getting the screen time, but they are getting bragging rights for being bad bitches. Like, they clawed themselves up from being side characters into my heart. And then we have the I Guess tier. The I Guess tier is characters who really were also integral to the plot, but at what cost? Like, I guess that people enjoyed them. I guess they were necessary. No hate against them. They weren't my personal preference. And then we have the No tier, which is just no. That's really self-explanatory. They wouldn't be people I would have dinner with, and they also wouldn't be people I would hang with at a party. Vibe check them and it's a no. So once again, I will state, these characters, this is all based on vibes. So I think the character work speaks for itself in this series. There was no one I would get rid of. Like, I love them all. I'm just about to vibe check the shit out of them. So we'll start, I guess, the main man, Kip. The growth. Let's just say it. The growth. Started from the bottom and now we're really here. What I love about Kip though is his internal character, his internal like morals stayed the same no matter how much he changed. He had such a heart for the entirety of the series, and for that he deserves a high five. When we first met him, he was just a young kid with no self-esteem who just happened to have these powers, and I was like, ugh, here we go again. However, I understand why that decision was made. I understand why the Giles were full spectrum polychromes, which, if you don't know, means they have the ability to cast powers with all colors. I don't know how to explain it if you haven't read it. Making the Giles all polychromes gave us that ambiguity about who is the Lightbringer. So I understand why that decision was made, even though it was like, oh, a kid who's never had anything going on in his life has all the powers, but you know, in this story I feel it served a purpose. And like, even the things that were bad about Kip to begin with, which I understand where some of the criticism comes from, he was very juvenile, especially about women, which did annoy me, but a lot of his immaturity at the beginning was just because he didn't understand women, I guess. He didn't see them as anything other than hot and intimidating until he became friends with them. As time goes on, he does get over that, but I do get it. I do get why some people have a problem with that. And yes, sometimes the self-loathing did get a little old, but even that makes sense, because if you think about it, if you have that extreme self-loathing, it is constantly on your mind. He felt unworthy, he felt ugly, and it's something you just can't break out of. You can't just have people tell you how great you are. You have to work to believe it. And over the course of the series, Kip did work to believe that. I loved his connection with Tia, and spoiler alert, I love everyone's connection with Tia. I also loved his friendship with the Mighty, his group of friends. And it did take me a minute to get on board with the whole Tysus thing, but even that was a really lovely journey, because he kind of grew into someone who was deserving of her, and she grew into someone who was deserving of him. Even though I do think he and Tia had more chemistry, I respect Brent Weeks for making bold decisions and sticking to them. That's one thing the guy knows how to do. I mean, what can I say about Kip? He's just a nice guy, and he's really the heart of the series. All his friendships with the Mighty, they were what made the series really hard to finish and put down, because I missed them. You know, Kip, he's perseverant, his weaknesses are his strengths. You know, he's almost too perfect. And he belongs in the Bringer of Light, obviously. So I will talk about his acts in the Burning White in the second half of the video, but it's all coming, don't worry. I will talk about that. But if you know, you know. Okay, Gavin. From the get-go, I knew this guy was going to be interesting. He's charismatic. He's clever. He's powerful. What could be wrong? And then we get hit with it immediately from the beginning. This guy is not who he says he is. He's a fraud, a joke, a fake, a phony. And I'm glad we had this reveal from essentially the beginning, because it just added such a unique dimension to his character. It made every decision he made, every little action, have a little bit of spice. And he had kind of the opposite journey to Kip. He starts off as the prism, basically the president, if you will. Can't get any further up the food chain of the Lightbringer series. He starts at the top and he tumbles down. He was interesting to read because he was extremely morally grey, and he's done some fucked up shit, which is why I was a little disappointed in his ending, which I will explain later. However, it is all about the journey, isn't it? His story had the absolute most twists and turns. First we think he imprisoned his brother, then we think he killed his brother, then we think he didn't kill his brother, then it turned out his brother had never been in prison and had actually been killed in the beginning, and his dad actually knew he wasn't Gavin all along, he was actually Dazin. He's literally a black prisoner. Don't get me started, a roller coaster. I like how he did right by Kip. I liked his relationship with Karis, though, to be honest. I kind of liked him with Marisia too, if he actually treated her like she deserved to be treated. She's a fucking queen. We'll get onto that. Anyway, Gavin built a wall. We just spend so much time in that guy's head. That being said, sometimes he just annoyed the fuck out of me, and I can't explain why. Like, he was so interesting, but then sometimes I was like, just shut the fuck up. And that's why, like, I'm having trouble, right? Because I think realistically he should be in the Bringers of Light tier, because he is essentially one of the main characters. But also sometimes I was just like, ugh, is there anything you can't do? Is there anyone you can't save? I do understand why people love him so much, but sometimes I was just like, I guess. So this is a dilemma for me. But once again, this is based on vibes. I think I'm gonna put him in the I guess tier. I know this is controversial. I actually feel really weird about doing that, but I don't know. I love him, but I think I love to dislike him. Okay, so next up we have Karis. Karis I like a lot, and the stuff I don't like about her I can understand. I even liked her dynamic with Andros and Gavin's father, and the way they sometimes had to work together and put aside their differences, and their relationship was super interesting. She forced him to see her as more than the woman his two sons fought over. Spoiler alert, 3 sons. Like, she kicks ass, she takes names, and she does have flaws, and I appreciate that. I think she could have handled Tia being a spy better. There was a bit of negligence on her part, which, you know, I'll forgive her for that. She had a lot going on, but nobody messes with Tia and gets away with it. I also think she could have handled the Marisia thing better, but she did come around to it in the end and recognized Marisia for the bad bitch she was. But like, even then, it was understandable. It was her, essentially, husband's ex-lover. So like, you know, Karis is a really fleshed out character, and to be honest, in this genre, sometimes it is hard to find women who have been written well by men. I loved her basically adopting Kip and seeing him as a son figure, and her whole, you know, turmoil with Simon. She was raw and real and human, arguably the most out of all, because she had to work for her strength in a way that Gavin and Kip didn't. Sheer hard work and tenacity, and for that, I'm gonna put her in Bringer of Light. Okay, I'm gonna do Iron Fist next. And here's the thing, Iron Fist would have been up the top, rivaling the tier. He and her were the two that would have shared the tier had it not been for two things. His whole King of Paria detour and killing Cruxer, especially that second one. Before those two things, he was my favorite. I would have gone to hell for this man. And the Paria thing, him becoming the King of Paria, I could understand because he had that ulterior motive of coming back to the Chromaria and ordering a Guile death and essentially destroying the Order of the Broken Eye. That was the goal he was working toward. However, the second one, this is bordering on review territory, so I'm going to elaborate more in the second half, but this really broke my heart. Like, how hard is it to shoot someone in the fucking leg? This is the thing I hate when characters are like, oh, I really don't want to kill this person, but they're in my way and I have to stop them. And it's like, just shoot them in the leg. I'm pretty sure that would do the job. You don't have to kill everyone all the time. Just immobilize them. Anyway, we'll talk about that later. Before that, love of my life. I pictured marriage, children, a white picket fence, perhaps a house on the beach. The Black Guard was his life and he was the most worthy commander. I loved every scene he was in. I loved how steadfast he was and how honorable he was. And it's like, he deserved Bringer of Light status, but I'm upset with him. So it does depend on how much forgiveness I have in me. Plus, I mean, technically he was spying for the Broken Eye the whole time and he didn't even manage to do what he came back to do after the whole Paria fiasco. So I'm really questioning myself here. Like, Bringer of Light, if I was slutty enough and forgiving enough, maybe. Yeah, I'll do it. You know what? I'll do it. It's okay. It's fine. But he is treading on thin ice. Next, I'm going to do Tysis. I did have a bit of that internalized misogyny at first where I didn't want to like Tysis because I already had Tia in my corner due to my loyalty, but she did grow on me. She's a solid gal. Who knew the chick that would ruin Kip's Thresher test would have become the love of his life? She had a lot of growth like Kip and she was extremely devoted to their marriage, which gives her points in my book. And her role in the Mighty, forming friendships with them, particularly with Winston, was super fun. And I liked that she had a different strength to them. Like, her strength was spy intelligence. Also, I really liked her cousin. She belongs in the Bad Bitches Club and probably runs the club. She's probably the secretary, the treasurer, and the president of the club. Next we have Big Leo. Big Leo, Big L. Honestly, I could just fast track the entire of the Mighty to the Bad Bitches Club. Though Big Leo is one who I felt probably the least connected to. I just felt like he needed to be written an additional personality trait because everyone had one. Like, Winston had no emotions, Bakudi was dumb, Ben was smart, and I felt like Big Leo, he was a true Mighty member, but he just needed one more distinctive personality trait because all the others had something in addition to being strong and funny. I still respect that guy. So, Bad Bitches Club. I'll do Fakudi. Fakudi, bad bitch, dumbest smart person I know, great at math and saying inappropriate things. He's in the Bad Bitches Club. Ben Hadid, smartest dumb person I know. Great work, Ben. The Mighty Thruster, great name for a boat. He had a cute relationship with Tia and Kip and a fiery one with Cruxer, and I have a big love for him. The Mighty's just an instant Bad Bitch Club member. Winston, the guy who loves to hate. Loved him and Tysis developing a friendship. Loved how he had zero emotions. Kind of reminds me of my sister, but in a nice way. He's, once again, just right up in the club. They all deserve to be there. So I didn't have Delos in the tier ranking list, but I just want to make a point to say, what the fuck happened to Delos? Like, where did he go? He was with the Mighty when they were back in the Chromaria, and when they were all making their escape, he got left behind. But then it's like, we don't know what happened to him. He got caught and questioned, but then we literally never saw him ever again. So I'm just confused. We'll do Lucia. Gone too soon. Gone too early for me to really get attached to her, but sweet girl. So I'm going to put her in the I guess tier. Cruxer. I love Cruxer so much. I love him an incredible amount. Honestly, Bringer of Light tier because I love him so much. I was devastated for him for the way that he died, to the point where I actually have a problem with it. But again, that's for later. Anyway, he was a very religious guy, basically the mini version of Iron Fist. I admired him essentially giving Kip everything he had, his loyalty, his love, his respect. He never left his side, and that's something I would have implemented into his death, but I digress. He was honorable, followed Kip to the ends of the earth, and you just can't buy that loyalty. So he's going in the Bringer of Light tier. I'll do Quentin. Quentin, another super cool dude. He honestly would have been in the I guess tier if it wasn't for his role in the last book, The Burning White, where he really helps Tia through all the bullshit she has to endure, and they have a really sweet dynamic. And he was very remorseful for the things he did, so I forgive him, okay? Bad bitch, but I will put him a the end of Bad Bitch. So Andros. Andros is going to be really hard for me to place because I want to put him in the Bringer of Light tier for his sheer audacity, but I also want to put him in the no tier for his sheer audacity. I would say majority of the most interesting things in this series happened because he orchestrated them. Let's not lie, he was essentially writing the story. Like, sorry Brent, Andros wrote this book. He was ruthless, cunning, impossibly sneaky, intelligent, and definitely the character who was the most fun to read. But he was one you tended to read more from others' perspectives, which makes sense to me because he knew so much of what was going on that having the story from his perspective would have just given too much away right off the get-go. And we were already working with multiple plot twists from the very beginning, so it would have been too much. And I also found him more interesting than any of the villains because he was essentially one too, but he was just so ambiguous and everything he did was so contrasting, you could never really figure him out. And finding out in the last book that he always believed he was the Lightbringer, that arrogance, the drama, and the absolute sense that it made. He was a man who always knew he was the smartest in the room. Of course he thinks he's the Lightbringer. My one gripe, again, is that I wasn't a fan of his ending, but I will get into that later. I like where he ended up, but I didn't like that he essentially gave up nothing to get it. Anyway, whatever, we'll get there when we get there. Oh, and Grinwoody and his dynamic with his servant Grinwoody, it was so interesting and hilarious when we got that reveal about Grinwoody. I loved their last moments together. We kind of got the sense that Andros was upset with him for deceiving him for so long because he genuinely thought that one person was loyal to him. Because to him, in the ending, even Felia wasn't his wife because she chose to leave him. Very sad. And you know what, fuck it, I'm putting him in Bringer of Light because you can't have the most interesting character in any other tier but Bringer of Light, even if he was evil. But even then, like, everything he did in his head he was doing for the greater good and, you know, willing to do everything to achieve it. But again, does that count when it's because you want to fulfill a self-actualized prophecy? Like, are you really a savior if you're saving people for yourself? Great question. Bringer of Light for sure. Okay, so Felia. It's like, I want to put Felia in Bad Bitch, I do, because she is one. However, both she and Andros did a really bad thing, and that was killing one of their children. And the distinction I make here is they both did this, but Andros really had that faith that he was doing it for the greater good and doing it to save humanity, whereas Felia was having that doubt about what they were doing and no longer really believed in their cause and yet still killed their son anyway. So that is not to judge her more harshly for the same crime, but you know, she's not as compelling a character as Andros, and she kind of loses a lot of her impact on the story once she died. So like, she is a bad bitch, but I wouldn't put her in the same level as the Mighty, and so for that I'm gonna put her in the I guess tier. Okay, so we have Tremblefist next. Another super interesting character because he did such awful things, but he did spend his life essentially repenting for all the stuff he did. His was a redemption arc, like a fully actualized redemption arc that I don't think many people pull off. And he was happy to live in the background, happy to trust other people around him to tell him what to do because he knew he couldn't trust himself. I liked the reveal that he took a step back and let his brother Iron Fist become the commander and sort of let Iron Fist be the legend. That broke me a little bit because that was a beautiful sibling moment. That reveal really was a moment where I had to put the book down and go, wow. And he died for good. He died saving the Mighty, and for that we're putting him in the Bad Bitches Club. Okay, so Arya, bad bitch, straight up. Ultimate diplomat. It's hard being right all the time. I loved how she completely like fucked up any plans Karis may have had for herself and was like, sorry, you can't be a blackguard. You have to marry Gavin. You have to become the White. Oh, and by the way, I'm grooming you to take over my job. That's queen shit. Bad bitch. Liv. Okay, Liv is interesting. Liv is a character who had so much potential, but you could take her out of the book and it would have no impact on the story, which sucks because I was really excited to see her journey to becoming a god and what kind of plans she had for the final battle in the last book. If you haven't read these books, everything I've been saying literally makes no sense. But then like, she did nothing, like literally nothing. No sacrifices or losses or wins, just nothing. The thing I loved most about her was her dynamic with Corvin, her father. I liked when they interacted because I love love Corvin so much, and I really wanted him to have his daughter. Like, it was for his sake I liked their interactions. But at the same time, I just don't get the point of her character, because, you know, it was interesting to see someone rationalizing why the Chimera was corrupt, what led to her decision to leave it, but then she just wasn't given the screen time to really, well, I guess the page time, to really process that or really explain her point of view. I don't think she got the time she deserved to do the things that she did, and for that I'm going to put her in the I guess tier, because I think she just needed more time, because what it ended up resulting in was her really doing nothing and having no impact on the story. So far no one's gone at the bottom. Corvin, immediately bad bitch. Love him, respects his wife, super loyal guy. There's not a lot that I could say. Bad bitch. Mauricia. I love Mauricia. I'm a Mauricia simp. She never complained despite having to pretend to be a literal slave to a man who she loved, who would never love her back. She just never complained. And she's literally, to me, the perfect woman. Like, she's smart, she's funny, she's beautiful. And her and Tia, mwah. She's all class, and she gets it from her grandmother. So bad bitch. So I'm going to do Gavin and Gil, the Grayling brothers, together. And sorry that the formatting is a little off. You can't really see their names. Both sweethearts, both bad bitches. I love them. Rip Gavin and poor Gil. They were just so worthy of being in the Blackguard and so nice. It was nice also to see, to get screen time for Blackguard younger members who weren't in the Mighty, to get that outside perspective. Those two brothers, like, I'm very close with my siblings, so when Gil lost Gavin, that was the second proper sob this book pulled from me, the first being Tremble Fist and Iron Fist. I did always have the softer spot for Gil being the older one, because I understand being an older sibling, and I loved their dedication to Karis and to the Chimera and to the White Aurea. They were just great kids. I think I even liked them more than some of the Mighty members. So they're going in the bad bitches club. Grinwoody, trash. The only respect for him I have is fooling Andros for all those years about secretly being the leader of the Broken Eye. But I think we can all agree he's just a bad guy, and he's not as fun as Andros. He got what he deserves. Tia got him good. Also, sometimes I wasn't even entirely clear on what the main goal or purpose of the Broken Eye was, but that might be just because I'm stupid. Grinwoody going in the no tier. Don't want a bit of him. So next we have Zyman. Such a big deal was made about him going to the Chimera to fuck shit up, but then he literally disappeared and did nothing. He had no scenes, so I don't understand what the big build up of him was going to the Chimera. But basically he's a disgusting human being, and he doesn't deserve a place at the table. He's the worst. His whole thing about finding his mother Karis and then trying to get freaky with her, like, is this the Mortal Instruments? Like, what's all this incest going on? Okay, Gunnar. I'm gonna be honest, Gunnar kind of annoyed the shit out of me. He didn't at first. At first I thought he was really entertaining, but it just got a bit much. By the end I was like, just shut the fuck up. So Gunnar's going in the no tier. Don't get me wrong, wouldn't take him out of the story, just wouldn't have had him around as much. So I'm gonna do Metasharp next, and what the fuck do I say about this guy? Like, I'm flabbergasted. I'm speechless. It's the teeth. Like, what was that? Let me say that again. It's the teeth. What the actual fuck? He pulls teeth from people he's killed and wears them. He likes to smell people's breath to check for cavities. What the fuck? Extremely interesting character. One of the most interesting, unique characters I've ever read. And, you know, once again, it all comes back to Tia. Him and Tia, their dynamic was so interesting. Because, you know, even though he was essentially forcing her to do unspeakable things, threatening her, harming her, but he also just really wanted her to succeed, just so that he could have someone to talk to and relate to, because this is due to her infiltrating the Broken Eye and working with him. But it's the teeth. There was not one boring moment with him, especially the scene where he kidnapped Tia in the last book. She got him so good. I didn't like a lot of characters' endings, but I really liked Metasharp's ending. Tia exacting revenge on him, and also Grinwoody. Like, I think those were well-deserved, meaningful endings. I really enjoy reading his character, and he didn't necessarily have a redemption arc, but you could see by the end there was that little bit of good in him that had just been destroyed from so many years of doing awful things. And that's what made him so intriguing. Like, he wasn't just an evil guy who did evil. Like, he also joined the Order, like Tia, to bring it down, but he just got so swept up in it and let it change him and change his purpose. So, like, I would have put him higher in the tier list just because he was so compelling, but the teeth kink is an automatic no. Okay, the third eye. What is Zaddy? She gives me Mauricia vibes. Just another absolutely classy bitch. Her, Mauricia, and Tysus, they were everything. They exude bad bitch energy. Give me a scene with those three ladies wreaking absolute havoc by taking over the world. Loved her work, bad bitch. And so I saved my favorite for last, and you knew it was coming. I defy you to tell me Tia is not the best character in this series. She is one of my favorite characters of all time, as well as Rin from the Poppy War. I love them so much. If I could just have a book of Tia, that would be heaven. She is the light of my mother freaking life. She is a saint. She deserves everything in the entire world. Her journey with Parul being the absence of light and having that ability that no one else really had and that she had to kind of discover and work on essentially on her own. It was fascinating and one of the most well paid off aspects of the book. Tia came full circle for me, and she was one of the few characters who did. First, her time in the Blackguard, where she was a lot like Kip. They had a lot of similarities because they both felt unworthy, had no self-worth, and it was through the healing power of friendship and love and having a purpose and a goal, they became more confident and felt like they really belonged somewhere. And of course, it was all dashed when the rest of the Mighty left her alone in the Cremeria once they made their escape in book 3. I was devastated for her when she got left behind. She was such a lonely soul already, and losing all her friends and having to be by herself, like, oh. But I was really intrigued for then what she had to do after, you know, her journey about infiltrating the Broken Eye, learning her Parul, learning how to use the Shimmer Cloak, and becoming an absolutely powerful assassin. I just can't. And I understand she killed people. I understand she killed innocent people, which could also make the same Androskyle argument about it being for the greater good. But honestly, I'm just so invested in her that I would forgive her of anything. And let's talk about her literally bringing down the Order of the Broken Eye, something nobody had ever done before. She did it. All that work and heartbreak and sacrifice she had at being left behind and losing her friends, it paid off because she achieved her goal, and single-handedly, because let's face it, Karis didn't really help her, brought it down. And the fact that she poisoned herself to do it and then beat the poison and fucking slayed a god, she did more than anyone else that day. You can't tell me otherwise. Because yes, all the rest of the Mighty brought down the, what would you call him? The Color Prince and his gods, but she literally killed an immortal being who would have probably destroyed the entire world. So, and yes, I am a huge fan of her and Kip, but I really loved her ending. I like that she ended up by herself, surrounded by friends and family, because that's what I felt like a lot of her journey was. It was finding a family and feeling like she belonged. That was so nice for me because I felt her loneliness when she was infiltrating the Order and how isolating that was. She was miserable, and all I wanted for her was to have an ending, not even necessarily a happy one, but an ending that was worthy of her. Tia is in the tier, duh. I have to go. So now, part 2 of this video, I'm going to be discussing my thoughts on the ending. And first, I do want to talk a little bit about the series as a whole. So for me, books 1 to 3, perfect, wouldn't change a thing about them. We were getting plot twist after plot twist, and you really can't talk about this series without giving something away. And okay, so book 4 I mostly liked. However, I thought Kip's scenes in book 4, The Blood Mirror, were just a little slow. I don't really think anything was happening there to really move the story forward, which normally I don't mind because in his case it was sort of more of a personal journey. 9 times out of 10 I'm happy to pause plot for character work, but there was just so much going on with the other characters that when I would read Kip's scenes in book 4, I was just a little bored. Which is why, you know, if the first 3 books were 5 stars, Blood Mirror for me would be 4 stars. And The Burning White, the last book, up until the last, say, 200 to 300 pages, I was ready to give this book 5 stars. However, I was not completely sold on the ending. And that doesn't mean I didn't like the book or that I hate the series or that I even hate the ending. It just wasn't my personal preference for these characters because I cared about them so much. I still love this series so much. It's still one of my favorite series of all time. I love the world, I love the magic system, but I will explain why I feel the way I do about the ending. This is gonna take a little while. So firstly, let's address, I don't know how you say his name, Orhalam. It would be so much better if his name was Orlaham, but it's Orhalam. Let's explain God himself coming down and being present for the final plot of the book. You know, God is real real, which is fun. But what I found frustrating about him was he kind of came down and saved the day and made sure everybody lived saving the day. And that, I think, is the biggest gripe I have, was this was such a high stakes series that honestly, the ending for me just didn't have enough death. It didn't have enough sacrifice, and it felt like the stakes kind of just disappeared. Yeah, so to put it simply, there wasn't enough death. That's just my personal taste, because as I was reading, I was just so prepared to be absolutely, gut-wrenched, and I was ready to feel bittersweet about the outcome. Instead, I was happy to see the characters alive, but I was disappointed because I was just basically ready to have my heart broken. So I don't know what that says about me. I just think there were several ways or versions of the ending that would have fulfilled that for me. All I really needed was one solid main character death, whether it was Kip or Andros or Gavin, and I will speak on all three. I will speak on the version of all three I would have given them. Firstly, Kip. I didn't like that Kip was brought back to life once he passed in the last book. The way he died was meaningful, it was emotional, it made sense to me because he basically was fulfilling the prophecy of the Lightbringer, and it caused him to use too much of his powers and essentially combust. And Kip, he'd always had this idea in the back of his head that he wasn't going to make it, that he would have to sacrifice himself to save the world, and he was prepared to do it because he was prepared to believe he was the Lightbringer. But then God just brought him back. So it was like a, oh, okay moment. And the reason, I think it would have been interesting if he died was, number one, it would have made Andros's position where he ends up more bittersweet because people believe Andros is now the Lightbringer, and Kip dying and him no longer having his grandson, aka real son, in his life would have made his ending more bittersweet. It would have made Gavin and Karis feel like they gave up their child and that they'd wasted so much time saving the world. They hadn't gotten the time with him they wanted. And overall, I just think it would have been more solid and inspiring. It's not that I necessarily wanted Kip to die, but when I felt like he died and was brought back, I kind of had this feeling like, oh, okay, everyone's gonna be okay. I literally don't have to be stressed. And then I wasn't really on the edge of my seat anymore. I also want to mention, I read the last book in a 24-hour readathon, which I did for absolutely no reason. Nobody knew I was doing it. I just decided that I wanted to read for 24 hours to see if I could do it, and I did. I didn't film it, I did it for myself. I don't know why. It was really exhausting. So it was kind of just like a daze reading this last book. Okay, anyway, let's talk a bit about Gavin. I definitely thought, if not Kip, if not Andros, Gavin should have died. I probably would have picked Gavin dying over Kip. And I say this not because I prefer Kip as a character, but because I think that would have been a more natural ending for Gavin to be the one who sacrifices himself. His whole thing was that he was very arrogant like his father, and I think him giving up his life for Kip, for his son would have been amazing. Yes, Kip died, and yes, if he had to get brought back, it would have been really cool for, because God was with Gavin at the time of the final battle. It would have been cool if it was because Gavin had pleaded to Or-Halam saying, I understand that he's dead, I will give my life for his life. Like there's a sacrifice there. And him saying, I will give my life for my son, is him really finally coming to terms and accepting that he cares about Kip, and that there was someone in the world that Gavin would give up saving himself for. Basically, Gavin would have given anyone up to save the world, but having him flip that around and actually saying, no, I pick my son over saving everyone. That just would have been really cool. And also, he had done a lot of awful things, so him having a redemption for his past, finally having something he didn't do for his own self-interest, saving his son by giving up his life, I just think that would have been cool. And Andros. The same could be said for Andros. I think Andros, what I'm talking about here about sacrifice, for Andros it could have been one of two ways. Either what I just said with Gavin, where Andros is the one who gives up his life to save Kip. Maybe he dies saving the world, perhaps knowing that no one would ever know that he did it, or they wouldn't believe he was the Lightbringer. They would think it was Kip, and he died being okay with that. He would never get that recognition of being a Lightbringer that he thought was owed to him. Him giving up the one purpose he was working towards his entire life, that he had given up his family for. Being okay with not being known as the most powerful man in history and dying anyway, and finally putting his family ahead of that dream. Ooh, that would have hit different. Alternatively, if he was the one who had lived, which he does. I liked that he was recognized as the Lightbringer and he got what he always wanted. And I did understand what Brent Weeks was trying to do there, because Andros gets to be Lightbringer even though he doesn't fully believe he deserved it, because Kip, Gavin and him himself all played a role in fulfilling the prophecy. However, I just wish he had gone a little bit further with that. If Andros did get to be Lightbringer, I wish then that he had lost his family because of it and had this moment of realization where he was like, wow, it wasn't worth it. Giving up my relationships with my sons, my wife, my grandchildren, leaving a family behind, it wasn't worth it. And even if he had just lost them, he didn't deserve both. He didn't deserve to be both Lightbringer and have his family around him, because that's how the book ends, is they all kind of stick together in the Chromeria, like the whole family. He still got his sons and he still got his title, because what I wanted for him was for him to get everything and realize that it meant nothing and that he had no one and he had spent his whole time throwing away his family. And I wanted him to regret it immediately, but he doesn't. He still gets to have Kip and Gavin in his life. He still gets Karis in his life. So it was just, for me, it was like nobody really had to give up anything, which is fine and nice and a bold choice, but it just felt too easy. And it felt like it was an ending maybe that we wanted, but we didn't really earn. Also, another thing I have about this series is Simon and Liv. They were just two characters who started off really strong, started off like they seemed they were going to have these arcs or plot points, but then just didn't. It was almost like they had been written to play a big role, but then they just didn't get to, like, it's like Brent Weeks changed his mind about what he was going to do with them. Because Simon was set up to be this big issue for Kip. And the second he got to the Chromeria to claim his rightful place as Andros's grandson, like Kip left, so then he didn't have to deal with him. And then Simon just got no page time apart from one or two interactions with Karis. And then Liv. It felt like Liv had this whole God thing building up, and she had that turmoil in the last book about whether she was going to side with the Colour Prince or with Kip. Also, I just realized I didn't rank the Colour Prince. He would go in the no tier. So there was this whole sort of setup about which side of the war she was going to fight on. But then she just ended up not doing anything in the final battle. So I just didn't get the purpose of that. Once again, I love this series. No hate to the series, no hate to the ending, but it just was something I was interested in that I felt like wasn't really given its full potential. Additionally, I'm going to talk about now the Iron Fist and Cruxer situation. I have a lot of thoughts about this. I was disappointed in Iron Fist killing Cruxer. All the decisions that I've talked about so far, while I didn't understand them, I respected them. However, this decision, I do not respect Brent Weeks. I do not respect you for making this decision. It was the only one that I didn't think was right. Sure, I didn't like the ending, but I understood that Brent Weeks made those choices. But I don't understand why he made this choice. I think making Cruxer die at the hands of the person he looked up to most, like, yeah, it's a nice idea, but what did we get from that? Like, what was the purpose of that? What did we learn from it? One, there was no consequences. Nobody was mad at Iron Fist. Kip didn't punish Iron Fist in any way. Everyone immediately forgave Iron Fist for killing one of the most loyal guys in the series, for killing Cruxer. Kip should have been devastated. He had one moment of looking at Cruxer's body being like, okay, and then that was it. He didn't process that this guy who had stood by him for the entire series was gone. He didn't take a moment to think about that. Iron Fist didn't even seem particularly sorry about killing Cruxer. Cruxer's death essentially had no impact on the story through the way that it happened, and I think if it was done a different way, it could have had a much bigger impact. Honestly, Kip looked at his dead best friend, let out one sob, and then just moved on. And I say this because, sure, okay, Brent Weeks wanted Cruxer to die, but if he had to die, it should have had more impact just because he was such a beloved character. What I mean is, personally, I would have done it in either one of two ways, because this is about me. Either I would have had Cruxer die in book 4, when Kip and the rest of the Mighty were in the Blood Forest thinking about going back to the Chromeria for the final battle. At the end of book 4 or the beginning of book 5. I would have had Kip wrestling with the idea of going back to the Chromeria and having Cruxer die, and having Cruxer die protecting him within the Blood Forest, making Kip realize through Cruxer dying that he needed to go back and save the people he loves. And then from then I would have had Cruxer's death largely impacting Kip's decision making through the 5th book, and him missing the guidance of his friend and the loyalty of his friend. Because that was kind of my number one thing with Cruxer dying, was his death wasn't mourned or really even noticed. The other way I would have had Croxa die was when Kip dies in the 5th book, having Croxa watch that and watch basically what was essentially his purpose was protecting Kip, having that crumble in front of him, the person he wanted to protect most dying, and then having Croxa absolutely wreak havoc on everyone around him within that final battle. Maybe even killing the Colour Prince, because Croxa was a religious man and the Colour Prince was someone who was disrespecting the religion of the Chromeria, dismantling the religion of the Chromeria. And so having Croxa, who was he was kind of a zealot, having Croxa who really believes in the Chromeria and the religion of Orhalam, killing the Colour Prince who was dismantling that religion. That would have been really interesting. And then even then, Croxa dying, perhaps die thinking Kip had died, and then maybe Kip coming back to life and having that heartbreak of, wow, Croxa didn't get to see that Kip lived. Like having that Romeo and Juliet moment, you know? Either way, I would have had Croxa's death involving Kip in some way, because that was essentially his purpose and his personal mission. And it felt so out of character for Croxa, who was such a steadfast, loyal, honorable guy, to become upset that his person he looked up to, realizing he was working for the Broken Eye all along and was not what the Blackguard would consider honorable. Having Croxa go and immediately try to kill Iron Fist without hearing him out and leaving Kip to go get himself killed, it just did not make sense to me, because there were no consequences for Iron Fist killing Croxa. Then I'm just like, what was the purpose? I think this is the only thing I'm actually mad about, and the only reason I'm mad about it is because I care so much about this series. I loved Brent Weeks' work here. I absolutely, I'm a die-hard fan of this series, and that's why I'm so upset. Because yes, Croxa is dead, okay, but it just didn't sit right with me the way that it happened, and made me dislike Iron Fist, who was also another one of my favorites. Other than that, my general thought about the ending was just there was no stakes and no sacrifice that made sense to me, which this series dealt with a lot. The point of the series, and one of the largest questions brought up in this series continuously, was what were people willing to sacrifice for the greater good? And it turns out nothing. They didn't have to sacrifice anything. But pushing it aside, this series still holds such a special place in my heart, and the journey, it is all about the journey. So the journey I loved and cherished so much. So for that, I'm willing to forgive Brent Weeks. It's okay, Brent. It's fine, okay? Next time, just consult me first. But anyway, let's take a deep breath. Thank you. Thank you so much for watching. Maybe I'll be back, maybe I won't. Who knows? I just do it when I feel like doing it. If you have something you want me to read that is maybe not perhaps similar to this series, but something you think I would like just from the way I talked about my likes and dislikes, let me know, because I've hit a bit of a reading slump at the moment, so I'm willing to take recommendations. Anyway, good job, doggy, for not moving too much. Thank you and goodbye.